This is part 2 of the Hidden Power and Other Essays. Chapter 4. The law of spirit, to which our investigation has now led us, is of the very widest scope. We have followed it up from the conception of the intelligence of spirit, subsisting in the initial atoms, to the aggregation of this intelligence as the conscious identity of the individual. But there is no reason why this law should cease to operate at this point, or at any point short of the whole. The test of the soundness of any principle is that it can operate as effectively on a large scale as on a small one, that though the nature of its field is determined by the nature of the principle itself, the extent of its field is unlimited. If, therefore, we continue to follow up the law we have been considering, it leads us to the conception of a unit of intelligence as far superior to that of the individual man as the unity of his individual intelligence is superior to that of the intelligence of any single atom of his body. And thus we may conceive of a collective individuality representing the spiritual character of any aggregate of men, the inhabitants of a city, a district, a country, or one of the entire world. Nor need the process stop here. On the same principle, there would be a superior collective individuality for the humanity of the entire solar system. And finally, we reach the conception of a supreme intelligence bringing together in itself the collective individualities of all the systems in the universe. This is by no means a merely fanciful notion. We find it as the law by which our own conscious individuality is constituted, and we find the analogous principle working universally on the physical plane. It is known to physical science as the law of inverse squares, by which the forces of reciprocal attraction or repulsion, as the case may be, are not merely equivalent to the sum of the forces emitted by the two bodies concerned, but are equivalent to these two forces multiplied together and divided by the square of the distance between them, so that the resultant power continually rises in a rapidly increasing ratio as the two reciprocally exciting bodies approach one another. Since this law is so universal throughout physical nature, the doctrine of continuity affords every ground for supposing that its analogue holds good in respect of spiritual nature. We must never lose sight of the old world saying that a truth on one plane is a truth on all. If a principle exists at all, it exists universally. We must not allow ourselves to be misled by appearances. We must remember that the perceptible results of the working of any principle consist of two factors: the principle itself, or the active factor, and the subject matter on which it acts, or the passive factor, and that while the former is invariable, the latter is variable, and that the operation of the same invariable upon different variables must necessarily produce a variety of results. This at once becomes evident if we state it mathematically. For example, A, B, or C multiplied by X gives respectively the results X, BX, CX, which differ materially from one another, though the factor X always remains the same. This law of the generation of power by attraction applies on the spiritual as well as on the physical plane, and acts with the same mathematical precision on both. And thus the human individuality consists not in the mere aggregation of its parts, whether spiritual or corporeal, but in the unity of power resulting from the intimate association into which those parts enter with one another, which unity, according to this law of the generation of power by attraction, is infinitely superior, both in intelligence and power, to any less fully integrated mode of spirit. Thus a natural principle, common alike to physical and spiritual law, fully accounts for all claims that have ever been made for the creative power of our thought over all things that come within the circle of our own particular life. Thus it is that each man is the centre of his own universe. It has the power, by directing his own thought, to control all things therein. But as the author has said above, there is no reason why this principle should not be recognized as expanding from the individual until it embraces the entire universe. Each man as the centre of his own world, is himself centred in a higher system in which he is only one of innumerable similar atoms. And this system, again, in a higher, until we reach the supreme centre of all things, intelligence and power, increased from centre to centre in a ratio rising with inconceivable rapidity, according to the law we are now investigating, until they culminate in illimitable intelligence and power commensurate with all being. Now we have seen that the relation of man to the lower modes of spirit is that of superiority and command. But what is this relation to these higher modes? In any harmoniously constituted system, the relation of the part to the whole never interferes with the free operation of the part in the performance of its own functions. But on the contrary, it is precisely by means of this relation that each part is maintained in a position to discharge all functions for which it is fitted. Thus, then, the subordination of the individual man to the supreme mind, so far from curtailing his liberty, is the very condition which makes liberty possible, or even life itself. The generic movement of the whole necessarily carries the part along with it. And so long as the part allows itself thus to be carried onwards, there will be no hindrance to its free working in any direction for which it is fitted by its own individuality. This truth was set forth in the old Hindu religion as the car of Jagannath, an ideal car only, which later ages degraded into a terribly material symbol. Jagannath means Lord of the Universe, and thus signifies the universal mind. This, by the law of being, must always move forward regardless of any attempts of individuals to restrain it. Those who mount upon its car move onward with it to endlessly advancing evolution, while those who seek to oppose it must be crushed beneath its wheels, for it is no respecter of persons. If, therefore, we would employ the universal law of spirit to control our own little individual worlds, we must also recognise it in respect to the supreme centre round which we ourselves revolve, but not in the old way of supposing that this centre is a capricious individuality extended to ourselves, which can be propitiated or cajoled into giving the good which he is not good enough to give of his own proper motion. So long as we retain this infantile idea, we have not come into the liberty which results from the knowledge of the certainty of law. Supreme mind is supreme law, and can be calculated upon with the same accuracy as when manifested in any of the particular laws of the physical world. And the result of studying, understanding and obeying the supreme law is that we thereby acquire the power to use it. Nor need we fear it with the old fear which comes from ignorance, for we can rely with confidence upon the proposition that the whole can have no interest adverse to the parts of which it is composed, and conversely that the part can have no interest adverse to the whole. Our ignorance of our relation to the whole may make us appear to have separate interests, but a truer knowledge must always show such an idea to be mistaken. For this reason, therefore, the same responsiveness of spirit which manifests itself as obedience to our wishes when we look to those degrees of spirit which are lower than her own individuality, must manifest itself as a necessary inflowing of intelligence and power when we look to the infinity of spirit, of which our individuality is a single expression, because in so looking upwards, we are looking for the higher degrees of ourself. The increased vitality of the parts means the increased vitality of the whole, and since it is impossible to conceive of spirit otherwise than as a continually expanding principle of life, the demand for such increased vitality must, by the inherent nature of spirit, be met by a corresponding supply of continually growing intelligence and power. Thus, by a natural law, the demand creates a supply, and this supply may be freely applied to any and every subject matter that commends itself to us. There is no limit to the supply of this energy other than what we ourselves put to it by our thought, nor is there any limit to the purposes we may make it serve other than the one grand law of order, which says that good things used for wrong purposes become evil. The consideration of the intelligent and responsive nature of spirit shows that there can be no limitations but these. The one is a limitation inherent in spirit itself, and the other is a limitation which has no root except in our own ignorance. It is true that to maintain our healthy action within the circle of our own individual world, we must continually move forward with the movement of the larger whole of which we form a part. But this does not imply any restriction of our liberty to make the fullest use of our lives in accordance with those universal principles of life upon which they are founded. For there is not one law for the part and another for the whole, but the same law of being permeates both alike. In proportion, therefore, as we realize the true law of our individuality, we shall find that it is one with the law of progress for the race. The collective individuality of mankind is only the reproduction on a larger scale of their personal individuality, and whatever action truly develops the inherent powers of the individual must necessarily be in line with that forward march of the universal mind, which is the evolution of humanity as a whole. Selfishness is a narrow view of our own nature, which loses sight of our place in relation to the whole, not perceiving that it is from this relation that our life is drawn. It is ignorance of our own possibilities and consequent limitation of our own powers. If, therefore, the evidence of harmonious correlation throughout the physical world leads irresistibly to the inference of intelligent spirit as the innermost within of all things, we must recognize ourselves also as individual manifestations of the same spirit which expresses itself throughout the universe as that power of intelligent responsiveness which is love. Thus, chapter 5. Thus we find ourselves to be a necessary and integral part of the infinite harmony of all being, not merely recognizing this great truth as a vague intuition, but as the logical and unavoidable result of the universal life principle which permeates all nature. We find our intuition was true because we have discovered the law which gave rise to it, and now intuition and investigation both unite in telling us of our own individual place in the great scheme of things. Even the most advanced among us, as yet, little more than the faintest adumbration of what this place is. Even the most advanced among us have, as yet, little more than the faintest adumbration of what this place is. It is a place of power towards those higher modes of spirit which we speak as the universal law. The law of man's inmost nature makes him as a lens, drawing into the focus of his own individuality all that he will of light and power and streams of an inexhaustible supply, and towards the lower modes of spirit which form for each one the sphere of his own particular world. Man thus becomes the directive centre of energy and order. Can we conceive of any position containing greater possibilities than these? The circle of this vital influence may expand as the individual grows into a wider contemplation of his unity with infinite being. But any more comprehensive law of relationship it would be impossible to formulate. Emerson has rightly said that a little algebra will often do far more towards clearing our ideas than a large amount of poetic simile. Algebraically, it is a self-evident proposition that any difference between various powers of x disappears when they are compared with x multiplied into itself to infinity, because there can be no ratio between any determinate power, however high, and the infinite, and thus the relation between the individual and all being must always remain the same. But this in no way interferes with the law of growth, by which the individual rises to higher and higher powers of his own individuality. The unchangeableness of the relation between all determinate powers of x and infinity does not affect the relation of the different powers of x between themselves, but rather the fact that the multiplication of x into itself is to infinity and so forth. We are what we are. We may become what we will. The Kabbalists tell us of the lost world, the word of power which mankind has lost. To him who discovers this word, all things are possible. In this mirific word, is this mirific word really lost? Yes and no. It is the open secret of the universe, and the Bible gives us the key to it. It tells us the word is nigh thee, it's near thee, near you, even in thy mouth and in your heart or in your mind. It's there. It is the most familiar of all words, the words which in our hearts we realise is the centre of a conscious being, and which is in our mouth 100 times a day. So there's the power is in that. It is the word, I am. Because I am what I am, I may be what I will to be. Okay, so there's a difference here, we believe. It's not saying I am as the I am I, or God said to Moses, I am what I am whatever I want to be, etc. It's very different. Okay, He is the Almighty, He's the Creator, the uncreated Creator, etc. He is officially the one I am, the sole I am. Okay, you have the triune, it's 3-part, but they're one, right? They're as one, so they're the one I am, the highest I am. Because I am what I am, I may be what I will be, I will to be. My individuality is one of the modes in which the infinite expresses itself, and therefore I am myself that very power which I find to be the innermost within of all things. To me, or to the author, thus realising the great unity of all spirit, the infinite is not the indefinite. Again, to me, thus realising the great unity of all spirit, the infinite is not the indefinite, for I see it to be the infinite of myself. So it's, again, it's not, he's not claiming that he's the great I am, or he's God, or he's Jesus Christ. He's just seeing and realising, and he's putting across that he is part of that infinite. It is the very same I am that I am. And this not by any act of uncertain favour, but by the law of polarity, which is the basis of all nature. The law of polarity is that law according to which everything attains completion by manifesting itself in the opposite direction to that from which it started. It is a simple law by which there can be no inside without an outside, nor an end of a stick without an opposite end. Life is motion, and all motion is the appearance of energy at another point, and where any work has been done under another form than that in which it originated, but whether it reappears and in whatever new forth, the vivifying energy is still the same. This is nothing else than the scientific doctrine of the conservation of energy, and it is upon this well recognised principle that our perception of ourselves as integral portions of the great universal power is based. We do well to pay heed to the sayings of the great teachers who have taught that all power is in the I am, and to accept this teaching by faith in their bare authority rather than not accept it at all. But the more excellent way is to know why they taught thus, and to realise for ourselves this first great law which all the masterminds have realised throughout the ages. It is indeed true that the lost word is the one most familiar to us, ever in our hearts and on our lips. We have lost not the word but the realisation of its power. And as the infinite depths of meaning which the words I am carry with them open out to us, we begin to realise the stupendous truth that we are ourselves the very power which we seek. It is the polarisation of spirit from the universal into the particular, carrying with it all its inherent powers. Just as the smallest flame has all the qualities of fire, the I am in the individual is none other than the I am in the universal. It is the same power working in a smaller sphere of which the individual is the centre. We are kind of doubtful there of that. As we stated earlier, or just before, the I am, the universal I am, is very different from the earthly I am, or us. So yeah, there's a difference there, we believe. Just because you say I am doesn't mean that you are that universal, highest level I am, or deity, or God. but you can be part of that. Yeah, because you're the vessel. The power of that I am, that spirit, comes through you. So you become one with the I am. You're connected, right? You're in union with him. It is the same power working in the smaller sphere of which the individual is the centre. This is the great truth which the ancients set forth under the figure of the macrocosm and the microcosm, the lesser I am, reproducing the precise images of the greater. Okay, so you're the lesser I am, we're the lesser I am, reflecting or reproducing the image of the greater I am, and of which the Bible tells us when it speaks of man as the image of God. So he's basically cleared it up for us there. Now, the immense practical importance of this principle is that it affords the key to the great law that as a man thinks, so he is. We are often asked why this should be, and the answer may be stated as follows. We know by personal experience that we realise our own livingness in two ways: by our power to act and our susceptibility to feel. And when we consider spirit in the absolute, we can only conceive of it as these two modes of livingness carry to infinity. This therefore means infinite susceptibility. There can be no question as to the degree of sensitiveness, for spirit is sensitiveness and is thus infinitely plastic to the slightest touch that is brought to bear upon it. And hence every thought we formulate sends its vibrating currents out into the infinite of spirit, producing there currents of like quality but of far vaster power. But spirit and the infinite is the creative power of the universe, and the impact of our thought upon it thus sets in motion a veritable creative force. And if this law holds good of one thought, it holds good of all, and hence we are continually creating for ourselves a world of surroundings which accurately reproduces the complexions of our own thoughts. Persistent thoughts will naturally produce a greater external effect than casual ones not centered upon any particular object. Scattered thoughts which recognize no principle of unity will fail to reproduce any principle of unity. The thought that we are weak and have no power over circumstances results in inability to control circumstances, and the thought of power produces power. At every moment we are dealing with an infinitely sensitive medium which stirs creative energies that give form to the slightest of our thought vibrations. This power is inherent in us because of our spiritual nature, and we cannot divest ourselves of it. Does that mean get ourselves rid of it? Get rid of it? It is our truly tremendous heritage, because it is a power which, if not intelligently brought into lines of orderly activity, will spend its uncontrolled forces in devastating energy. If it is not used to build up, it will destroy, and there is nothing exceptional in this. It is merely the reappearance on the plane of the universal and undifferentiated of the same principle that pervades all the forces of nature. Which of these is not destructive unless drawn off into some definite direction? Accumulated steam, accumulated electricity, accumulated water will at length burst forth, carrying destruction all around. But, drawn off through suitable channels, they become sources of constructive power, inexhaustible as nature itself. And here, let us pause to draw attention to this idea of accumulation. The greater the accumulation of energy, the greater the danger if it be not directed into a proper order, and the greater the power if it be. Fortunately for mankind, physical forces such as electricity do not usually subsist in a highly concentrated form. Occasionally circumstances concur to produce such concentration, but as a rule the elements of power are more or less equally dispersed. Similarly, for the mass of mankind, this spiritual power has not yet reached a very high degree of concentration. Every mind, it is true, must be in some measure a centre of concentration, or could you refer to it as a conduit? For otherwise it would have no conscious individuality. But the power of the individualized mind rapidly rises as it recognizes its unity with the infinite life, and its thought currents, whether well or ill directed, then assume a proportionately great significance. Hence the ill effects of wrongly directed thought are in some degree mitigated in the great mass of mankind, and many causes are in operation to give a right direction to their thoughts, though the thinkers themselves are ignorant of what thought power is. To give a right direction to the thoughts of ignorant thinkers is the purpose of much religious teaching, which these uninstructed ones must accept by faith and bear authority, because they are unable to realize its true import. But notwithstanding the aids thus afforded to mankind, the general stream of unregulated thought cannot but have an adverse tendency, and hence the great object to which the instructed mind directs its power is to free itself from the entanglements of disordered thought, and to help others to do the same. To escape from this entanglement is to attain perfect liberty, which is perfect power.